Thank you, Honourable Member. I would remind you that we are speaking on the Hoist Amendment. So the Honourable Member, the Honourable Leader of the ND Opposition.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'm pleased to be able to rise to formally engage in this debate today in the Legislature. Let me begin by saying that I will be voting in favour of this hoist because we cannot support this piece of legislation as it is currently constructed. And I want to begin by acknowledging the fact that this legislation does remove 11.1 from the Human Rights Code, and that is a good thing because I've always characterized 11.1 as a scar on an otherwise beautiful document. And it's a scar that existed only in the province of Alberta. It was a scar that was inflicted upon an otherwise beautiful document by this PC government in 2009. And so I am pleased that that particular scar is being corrected through this bill. Nonetheless, unfortunately, the other components of this bill are premised on assumptions that are so deeply troubling to me that I'm still not able to support it. And so those are the things that I want to talk about. First of all, of course, there's this issue of parental right to be notified on education with respect to human sexuality. And let me just put it very clearly on the record. I have no difficulty with that. I think parents should be part of a conversation about human sexuality, and they should know when their kids are being taught those issues at school. And I agree with the kind of scenario that the member from Airdrie outlined in that regard. That's not the issue here, though. We're not talking about issues of human sexuality. We are talking about the ability to openly and with pride protect the rights of students who are members of the LGBT community or who are themselves part of a family where, say, both parents are same-sex or transgendered or another member of a sexual minority group. And that's who we're talking about protecting. So that's a different issue. And so this bill was very clearly, if you look at the history, it was very clearly devised, delivered, distributed, promoted in an effort to negate discussion and to protect this government and the official opposition from having to vote on Bill 202. And it is a very intentional attempt to muddy the waters as much as possible and avoid a clear understanding of what people's positions were with respect to Bill 202. But I've been very pleased to see the commentary that has occurred within the public since, because most people see that for what it is, and they understand that at its heart, this bill does nothing to protect the rights of minority students, sexual minority students, to promote and begin a GSA in their schools. So, in fact, what this does is it simply protects the status quo with respect to the rights of students to seek out a GSA as a means of protecting themselves and their rights in their school setting. And to be clear, GSAs do exist in other jurisdictions which have faith-based schools as part of their tradition. It exists both in Ontario and Manitoba, and it happened, frankly, without the sky falling. And frankly, were there enough courage in this Assembly, it could happen here. So this government continuously talks about balancing the rights between parents and GLBTQ students, and or GLBTQ students. And I'm going to talk about how offensive that notion is in just a moment. But I just want to speak for a moment as a parent, because everyone keeps talking about parental rights. Well, I too am a parent, Madam Chair, and I have to tell you that I am deeply offended that another parent believes that they have a right to tell me what after-school extracurricular activities my kids can be part of. And be very clear, that's what's happening here. No one is telling any single solitary parent in this province that their children have to go to a GSA after school. No one is telling a parent that, and that is not what Bill 202 would have done. What's happening here is that this government, probably with the support of the official opposition, is telling me that my kids cannot go to a GSA if they choose to, if their school board will not allow them to do it. So just to be very clear, parental rights are at issue here, but it's my parental rights that are at issue, because it's the ability to go that is being limited. It is not the ability to not go, which is being eliminated. So let us be very clear that that so-called balance is disingenuous at best when it is being discussed here. Now let's talk as well about the notion of balancing human rights and balancing one of those protected grounds under Section 15 of our Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Well, I've said this before and I'm going to say it again. If a parent came to me and said that their rights were being prohibited because, or somehow limited, because my kid wanted to start an anti-racism class or an anti-racism club after school, and if this government stood up for that parent's rights to say, my kid cannot start an anti-racism club after school, people in this province, and probably even the majority of folks over on that side, would lose their heads. And so they should, because we all get that racism is bad. But I hate to break it to you folks, but racism is not the only prohibited ground of discrimination under Section 15 of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Sexual orientation is also a prohibited ground under Section 15 of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And let us be very clear, that Canadian Charter does not say racism is something that should not ever happen, and also we'd also really kind of hope that if it's not inconvenient for you, you should also try not to be homophobic either. That's not the way the Charter reads. The Charter reads that both rights deserve equal protection, yet this government's bill, implicit in this government's bill, is a prioritization, a hierarchy of what rights they believe are more important than others. And with that, I'm talking just in terms of those enumerated grounds upon which all Canadians deserve protection, which are listed in Section 15 of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. So inherent in that, then, is that issue. And I find it incredibly troubling that people, probably the majority of people in this legislature, don't understand that people and children and families and communities in this province deserve as much protection from homophobia as they do from racism, because it is very clear to me that that understanding is not commonly understood, embraced, or accepted across the aisle. So that is why, and it's that fundamental presumption which drives the decision of this government to talk about balancing the rights of parents to tell me that my kids cannot participate in a GSA in a publicly funded school should the school board decide they're opposed to it. That is what is fundamentally wrong with this bill, and that is why under no circumstances can I support it. So let's just talk a little bit about some of the other disingenuous arguments that we've seen float across the aisle from people defending this piece of legislation. Well, the sponsor of the bill has talked publicly several times today about how she will do everything she can to promote GSAs in as many parts of the province as she possibly can. So my specific question to her is, has she planned, I don't know what her financial situation is like, has she or she been talking perhaps with the Minister of Justice, planned for that roughly $25,000 that each judicial review application will cost?
More.
And is the plan to pay that $25,000 or more on behalf of each marginalized kid who is told that he or she and their friends cannot start a club, a voluntary club after school that would help kids that are systemically bullied as a result of outdated and undeveloped understandings of what true equality consists of. When those kids are bullied by that, they need to be able to reach into their back pocket and bust out with a $25,000 bill to pay for a lawyer to do a judicial review application. And people over there call that a solution? I mean, it's interesting. You know, we often talk about the Premier and his relationship with the banking industry, but if he, honest to God, thinks a $25,000 bill is a solution to the majority of kids who are going to come up against the inability to support, develop clubs that will provide them support and protection from bullying, then it is clearly an indication that he's desperately out of touch with the economic circumstances of the vast majority of people who live in the province over which he has a governance relationship or governance authority. Because, I don't know, maybe CIBC, maybe Enbridge can pull $25,000 out of their back pocket to run a judicial review application, but I'm pretty sure most Albertans cannot. And so to suggest that that is a solution is disingenuous, Madam Speaker, incredibly disingenuous. Now, so we've talked about how this might perhaps be an issue with respect to, some issues around faith issues. But I would suggest to you, Madam Chair, that that's not the case. It's absolutely not the case. Again, these GSAs would be voluntary. No one's imposing them on anybody. The EPSB allows for every child within the Edmonton Public School Board who wants to start a GSA to start a GSA. And that's why the vast majority of GSAs in Alberta reside in the Edmonton Public School Board. Interestingly, the Edmonton Public School Board uses its public dollars to also fund several destination faith-based schools. That exists within the EPSB. Yet that is somehow something we've not heard a peep about, how that somehow has undermined the rights of those who participate and attend those schools. Because, in my view, it doesn't. A voluntary support group within the adjacent to a faith-based education, they're not mutually exclusive, Madam Speaker. And frankly, I think it's the people who suggest that they are. Those are the ones that are sowing divisiveness. Those are the ones that are sowing unnecessary debate. Those are the ones who are sowing a fight where none exists. Because I think if it can happen in the EPSB, frankly, it should be able to happen anywhere else. So there's a lot of talk about school board rights. School board rights. Now, I find that very entertaining, Madam Chair, because school boards, just to be clear, they're institutions. And when we're talking about the fundamental charter-protected rights of human beings, it's a little bit ironic that a minister who was prepared to overlook school board rights when it came to funding priorities is prepared to now hold them up as a means of undermining the charter-protected rights of kids and their families. But, I just want to mention, there was a vote at one point by the School Boards Association back in 2012 around a policy that would have supported, among other things, GSAs. And at that point, one of the people amongst those school boards who voted against that policy was quoted as saying, quote, "If children with a gay tendency appear in a certain way, we know that we have to be vigilant to make sure they are not discriminated against," end quote. But when asked if those students should try to be less identifiable, the same school board representative said, quote, "I think for their own benefit, it would be helpful," end quote. So those are the rights. That's a good example of the concerns that are expressed by some representatives of the school boards against adopting a policy that would have been adopted had we voted in favour of Bill 202. And those are the rights and the opinions that these folks are committed over there to supporting and protecting. And I would say to you, Madam Chair, that that caucus over there is profoundly, deeply, and probably irreparably out of touch with the values of the vast majority of Albertans in choosing to represent those notions. These are fundamental rights. They can be accommodated. They can be accommodated with an inclusive, welcoming, volunteering, or voluntary approach. That is something that Bill 10 prohibits. It is something that facilitates an ongoing ban on GSAs where people who have the attitudes I just described choose to do it, and that's why we can't support it. Thank you.